This is the Greenup Beacon Video News Magazine, a presentation of the Greenup Beacon Media Group and First and People's Bank and Trust. Also brought to you by Our Lady of Bellefonte Hospital, Buddy Gallion and Greenup County EMS, and Carmen Funeral Home. The Greenup Beacon Video News Magazine is hosted by Brittany Hoback with co-host Hank Bond. It is directed and produced by Keith Adkins. This is an exclusive presentation of the Greenup Beacon Media Group, available only at greenupbeacon.com and greenupbeacon2.com.
You are watching a Beacon Media production.
Hello everybody. Today in this segment we're going to be making dill pickles. So if you're not fortunate enough to have a garden in your backyard like me, you can always go to a farmer's market and purchase yourself some good pickling cucumbers. These are different than regular cucumbers because they grow smaller and they have a little bit more of a rigid skin to them and it holds up better during the processing of pickles. So I've already got most of my pickles cut up here, but I saved one to show you just about how thick we would like them. So we'll go ahead and do that. So you want pickles just like, you don't want them too fat, you don't want them too skinny, just about how you'd like them on your hamburger. So it's about 1/4 of an inch, and you have to make sure your knives are sharp when you do this, especially when you go through about 9 to 11 pounds of pickles. I always have to sharpen my knives before we start because my kids like to use knives for other things other than cutting. They like to use it to open jars and pry up nails and things like that, so I want to make sure that got nice sharp knives. So if you don't get it exactly 1/4 of an inch, it's no big deal. This isn't really an exact science. Like I just did that one. And I usually have my dogs here in the kitchen, and with these ones that I get too thin or too thick, they sort of get an extra treat. I'm glad that they like vegetables. Alright, so we're going to throw our 2 ends away. So when I make dill pickles, I also like to sneak in a couple of other vegetables that kids don't really like. So here I've got some zucchini squash, and we're going to use those and pickle those just like the cucumbers. You can also use yellow squash, and most of the time the kids have absolutely no idea that they're eating zucchini or squash because it tastes just like dill pickles, so that works out nice. I also have some white onions here that I've chopped up that sort of gives the brine a little more flavor. So next we have to do is make the brine. I cheat just a little bit and use Mrs. Wage's kosher dill pickle mix. It comes in a couple different varieties. You can pick it up at the grocery store. And they have a bread and butter variety and also a hot and spicy pickle one, which I haven't tried yet. I think I will do that this season. So you just take this mix here and you dump it into your pan. And this stuff is very yellow, so it will stain whatever you are doing if you get it places like I do, because I'm always trashing the whole kitchen whenever I'm doing this. So you'll need 3 1/3 cups of distilled white vinegar. Then we'll also need 7 1/3 cups of water. This is a 2-cup measuring cup, so I'm not miscounting, I promise. Just 2. Seven 1/3. Alright. So now we're going to turn on the heat. Medium heat works best to get this brine stirred up and warm. time you also want to turn on your hot water canner. I think when I first started doing this with my grandmother and my dad, I had this crazy misconception that you always had to have a pressure cooker to process everything. But whenever you're dealing with high acid foods like pickles or salsa, even fruits, you just can use just a hot water canner bath, which makes the whole process a lot easier when you don't have to worry about sealing the jars and getting them under a certain pressure for a certain amount of time. So this is definitely the easier way to do the whole canning process. So you definitely want to turn your heat onto that. So now while this brine is getting hot, we're going to go ahead and get our jars out and start packing the cucumbers into the jars. When you do this method, when you're using your cold vegetables, it's called cold packing as opposed to hot packing, where you dump all the food into the brine, stir it up, and then put it into the jars hot. When you cold pack vegetables, it, especially the pickles, I think that it preserves a lot of the crispness, because a lot of times whenever you do the step where you do the hot pack, it breaks it down and then your pickles end up soft. So I don't like soft pickles. So we're going to do the cold pack method. I have my quart jars here in the dishwasher, and I ran them through the the light cycle and have them steamed dry so they're pretty warm. Get these bad boys out. I found so far that the best place to get canning jars is Big Lots. They have the best price, if you can find them. They go quickly whenever they stock the shelves. Walmart and Tractor Supply Co. and Kroger's usually carries a nice selection of canning stuff too, but Big Lots has the best prices. So now these jars are cleaned and sterilized, and then they have come with their own lids and rings here. So you'll need to take the lids and put them into a small saucepan here on the burner and have them warm whenever you go to put the lids on the jars. As you put it on simmer. Also, one great thing that you need to do before you start canning is go to grocery store, go to Walmart, and pick up a canning set by Ball. Makes a really, really nice one, and they come with this cute little magnet thing that you can pick the hot lids up out of the water, which saves your fingers. And then there is also this tool, which measures head space, which we'll talk about later, and also gets the air bubbles out of the jars before you put the lids on. And then this crucial piece of equipment helps get the hot jars out of the canner and onto your countertop to cool. So you'll definitely need that. Also going to need a wet rag to wipe off the lids of the jars once you pack the vegetables in there and you get the brine in there, because the jars have to be clean on the lid in order for the lids to seal. Alright, so like I said, I cheat a little bit by using Mrs. Wage's pickle mix, but from there I sort of use that as my base, and then I kind of jazz it up as I go. So I like to add some peppercorns to each jar. These are whole peppercorns. And again, not a real exact science, just tossing a little small handful in there. Alright, so now I'm going to bring my onions over and toss those in there. You do not have to use onions if you don't like onions in there, but they do taste really nice on a hamburger. They taste like dill pickled onions. And my kids actually like the onions in here. So I'm not afraid to pack a lot in here. All right, so now I'm going to sneak my zucchini into my pickles so that the kids get a little bit different variety of vegetables in there. I don't tell them I do this. And again, you do not have to do it. I have zucchini and I have squash growing in my garden, and it produces a lot of zucchini and a lot of squash, so I usually have to find other creative ways to use those vegetables up. I have a really awesome zucchini chocolate cake that we'll be making on another segment. Once again, to hide vegetables in food that the kids will eat. Alright, and now we'll start putting cucumbers into the jars. And you want them to kind of not have a lot of space, but you don't want to jam them in there either. Alright, so now we have all of our jars packed with our cucumbers. I also top them off with some more onions, and like I said, you want to pack them to where it's, like I said, everything is stacked nicely, but you don't want to jam it all down in there because then the brine won't be able to get around there and get all the pickles, and you'll crush some of them. So I also use pickle crisp granules by ball, and you can pick that up at Kroger's or Walmart. And for quart jars, you use a rounded 1/4 teaspoonful, and you just put some of that stuff there on top. And this helps keep your pickles crisp during processing. Because we don't like mushy pickles. And now that we have our jars packed, I'm going to move them over here to where our brine is just about ready to boil. And like I said, this is where it gets a little messy. That's why I always use a green towel over here, because the brine is yellow-green in color. So one year I used white dish towels, and I could not get the yellow out of the dish towels. So so we've got our jars packed here. Our brine is just about ready to boil. I got my wet washcloth here ready to wipe off the tops of the lids, and then we'll go ahead and load up our hot water canner. Alright, so now we have our brine, and it is just about to boil, and we have our lids for the jars here and some hot water. I also have some extra water here that is close to boiling, just in case we don't have enough water covering the cans whenever we put them into the canner. You want about an inch of water over top of the jars for processing. So this is the hot part of the job. And you're just going to take, one's definitely a measuring cup with a pour feature on it, so that you can get the brine directly where you want it. And you'll dip up some and pour it over top of the pickles. And you want to leave about a 1/2 inch of headspace. And headspace is the actual space from the top of the brine to the top of your jar. So again, this spatula here has a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, and an inch marked on here, so you can just set it into the jar and measure out your headspace that way. So this is about a 1/2 inch, which really by eye leveling it, it's here to like the first set of rings on there. So you'll need to make sure you have that. When you heat the jars, Alright, so we're going to continue to fill up our jars with the brine. Again, leaving about a 1/2 inch headspace. So when you're canning vegetables, when it's in the hot water bath, it causes everything inside the jar to expand. And you need the headspace right in there to allow for the expansion. And then when you take the jars out of the hot water bath and they cool, that is what creates the suction and seals your jar lids. Alright, so we're going to do 4 jars first. You want to make sure that you get these into the hot water canner while everything in here is still hot, or your jars will break, which has happened to me a few times, usually early on in the season when I'm just starting this over for the year. I break a few jars. Alright, so you want to make sure all of the air bubbles are out, so you can take the spatula and you can just slide it along the sides of the jar and make sure the brine gets all done in there, and all the air bubbles are out. Just a little bit more brine to this. And making sure your headspace is right. Now we take this awesome tool here, and it has a magnet on it, and we'll get the lids out of hot water here. Actually, I'm gonna make sure my lids are clean. So you want to wipe the rim of the jar off with a wet washcloth to make sure there's nothing on there that will keep it from sealing properly. So now you're just going to place the lids here on top of the jars. And then you'll take your rings and tighten it down just about finger tight. You don't have to crank it down on there because then you'll never get it open. Alright, so now I'm going to take the lid off of my canner, and the water is boiling. So now I'm going to take my jar handler here and go ahead and carefully set these hot jars into the ring. There's a metal ring here inside the canner that allows you to set all your jars down in it first and then lower them into the hot water bath all together. Make sure you're careful of the steam that's coming up out of here because you will burn yourself. You want to make sure that you've left enough room around the jars so that all the water can circulate evenly around the jars. Take your oven mitts and go ahead and lower the jars carefully into the hot water bath. So here I don't have enough water over top of my lids, so I'm going to use this that I've had here waiting to cover it. Just a little bit more. Alright. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the lid back on. And you need to start timing the processing of the jars once this returns back to a boil. So when it comes back to a boil, you're going to process your quarts for 10 minutes. And then if you're doing pints, you would do that for 5 minutes. So we'll go ahead and once it comes to a boil, we'll go ahead and start our 10-minute time. Alright, so our 10-minute processing time is up. So we're going to go ahead and remove the lid carefully because it does have a lot of steam. And we're going to go ahead and lift our jars up out of there. Back to our trusty tool. You have to dump a little of the water off the lids there. I'm going to go ahead and transfer them over here to cool. This is where the actual sealing of the jars will take place, is once the jars come back to room temperature, it'll suck that lid down onto the jar, and you'll actually hear a pop, and that way you know that you've successfully sealed the jar. So I'm going to go ahead and fill my remaining jars with the brine. Again, leaving a 1/2 inch headspace. Sometimes I get a little wild with my pouring. So the jars that you've already processed and are over there on the counter cooling, you want to allow 24 hours for them to seal. And if they have not sealed, then you want to go ahead and put those jars into the refrigerator or give them to your neighbors, and you'll have to go ahead and eat those pickles right away. Occasionally you'll have a jar that doesn't seal for various reasons, whether there was something on the lid whenever you started, or the headspace wasn't adequate enough. Most of the time-consuming work when you're canning goes into the actual preparation of the food, slicing of the cucumbers, washing them, slicing them, dragging out all of your canning supplies. But these pickles taste awesome, and my kids don't eat anything except for these pickles. I'm going to have to try that hot and spicy pickle recipe though. I think it would be excellent. Alright, almost done here. And again, you want to take your spatula and slide it down along the sides of the jars to get out the air bubbles out of the jar. That's why if you pack these jars too tight, it makes this part of the process a little more difficult. Take your wet rag and wipe the lids off. Since I got a little wild with the brine pouring this time, I made a little bit of a mess. No worries. Then take your magnet and go ahead and get the lids out of the hot water here. Set them down on top of the jars. Turn this off. Take your rings and tighten them down on the jars. Again, just finger tight. You don't have to get serious with the tightening part. Alright, now we'll go ahead and take our tongs here, set the jars into the rack. Again, you want to make sure that there is space between the jars so that everybody gets processed evenly. Get this fifth one in the middle. Move some jars over. Alright. Go ahead and lower the rack down into the hot water canner. And this time we know we have enough water to cover an inch over the top of the jar. turn my heat up a little bit. Go ahead and put the lid back on. And when the water returns to a boil, go ahead and process this batch for 10 minutes as well. Alright, so our 10-minute process time is up on this second batch of pickles. I'm going to go ahead and remove the lid carefully. And go ahead and lift the cans out of the canner. And take our trusty tool. I tried to do this one year without this tool, and it was not a pretty sight. And while we were waiting for this batch to process, I actually heard one of the jars we have over here seal already. Again, you'll hear like a little pop, and that way you'll know that it's sealed. And also it will, like, there's a dimple on the lids that will actually suck down into the jar. And there was another one suck down into the jar, and that way you also know that it's sealed. Alright, so we have made 9 quarts of pickles, and I just want to run through real quick about what all you'll need. So you will need to find yourself some good pickling cucumbers, and you can get those at a farmer's market or your garden. Start with that. You don't have to add the zucchini or the squash or the peppercorns or the onions to it. You can just do straight pickles. But I think that this adds a little bit more of a unique flavor to the pickle brine. I use Mrs. Wages, and again, this is the spicy pickle version, and they have a dill pickle, and they also have a bread and butter that you can use. So you'll need to take this and 3 1/3 cups of white vinegar and 7 1/3 cup of water, and mix that all up, and when it's just about ready to boil, you'll put it into your jars and process quarts for 10 minutes and pints for 5. And it's pretty easy, and I think that you will enjoy these pickles. They have a really, really good taste to them. Since we cold packed them, they usually stay pretty crisp, and then also using the pickle crisp also helps out with that. So hope that you pick yourself up a canner and try this. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to get kids involved. It's definitely an art that has been dying over the years, but it's very rewarding. It's relaxing, especially when you have some help. So I really hope that this is something you guys can pick up and enjoy doing at home. Thank you.
This is the Greenup Beacon Video News Magazine, a presentation of the Greenup Beacon Media Group and First and People's Bank and Trust. Also brought to you by Our Lady of Bellefonte Hospital, Buddy Gallion and Greenup County EMS, and Carmen Funeral Home. The Greenup Beacon Video News Magazine is hosted by Brittany Hoback with co-host Hank Bond. It is directed and produced by Keith Adkins. This is an exclusive presentation of the Greenup Beacon Media Group, available only at greenupbeacon.com and greenupbeacon2.com.